Letters from Kurdistan, audiobook summary. This audio is a summary and translation based on the Arabic copy of Letters from Kurdistan, written by Oskar Mann, translated into Arabic by Jan Dost, and published by Ramina. This is not a full translation of the book, it is a narrated summary of the main content, prepared in simple English for listeners who want to understand what the book is really about. Letters from Kurdistan is not a normal book with one story from beginning to end. It is a collection of letters, travel reports, and personal observations written by Oskar Mann, a German orientalist and linguist, during his journeys through Persia and Kurdish regions between 1901 and 1907. At first, the book may feel like a private diary, letters to family, reports to scholars, comments about travel, illness, money, animals, weather, and delayed post. But slowly, these letters become something much larger. They become a record of Kurdish language, oral literature, dialects, towns, villages, tribes, travel routes, and daily life at the beginning of the 20th century. Oskar Mann was not traveling for pleasure. He was traveling as a researcher. His main aim was to study Kurdish and Persian dialects directly from the people who spoke them. He wanted to collect grammar, vocabulary, songs, stories, poems, folk epics, and manuscripts from different regions. The Arabic translator presents the book as an important source for understanding Kurdish society and Kurdish language, but he also warns the reader that Mann's writing often carries a colonial tone. Mann sometimes speaks about local people with superiority and harsh judgment. So the book must be read carefully. It is valuable, but it is not neutral. It gives us knowledge, but it also shows us how some European scholars looked at the East during that period. Oskar Mann was born in Berlin in 1867. He studied Oriental languages, Persian, Arabic, Sanskrit, and comparative philology. He worked at the Royal Library in Berlin, especially with Oriental manuscripts. His scientific interest led him to plan field research in Persia and Kurdish regions, and his expeditions were supported by the Royal Prussian Academy of Sciences. His first journey took place between 1901 and 1903. He traveled from Europe by train and ship, passing through Marseille, Port Said, Bombay, and finally arriving at Bushehr on the Persian Gulf. From there, he moved inland through Persia and eastern Kurdish regions. This first journey is important because it shows how Mann began building his map of languages. He visited places such as Shiraz, Isfahan, Kermanshah, Hamadan, Sanandaj, Sakez, Urmia, Tabriz, Tehran, and Saujbulaq, today known as Mahabad. In each place, he looked for speakers who could help him record local dialects. He worked with assistants, often called Mirza, who helped him write down words, translate texts, and understand conversations. One of the first major centers of his work was Kermanshah. In Kermanshah, Mann became deeply involved in Kurdish dialect research. The city gave him access to different Kurdish-speaking communities and tribal groups around the region. He studied the Kurdish dialect of Kermanshah and compared it with the speech of groups such as Kalhur, Zangana, Guran, Sanjabi, and Bajalan. Here, his work becomes very detailed. He records grammar, verbs, nouns, adjectives, stories, translations, and new words. He becomes excited when he finds Kurdish words that are not recorded in existing dictionaries. For Mann, every word matters. If a Kurdish word appears in conversation, he wants it written down immediately. But the Kermanshah letters are not only about language. They also show the difficulty of field research. Mann writes about illness, fever, local officials, letters of recommendation, money, and the need to work with the right people. He is often weak from sickness, but the amount of material he finds keeps him working. From Kermanshah, the book moves into wider research in nearby regions. Mann travels through Luristan and other areas to understand where one dialect ends and another begins. This is not a simple journey from one town to another. For him, every road is also a linguistic border. Every village may reveal a new sound, a new word, or a new grammatical form. He studies areas such as Mahabad, Nahavand, Barujerd, Kansar, and Semnan. In these places, he compares Kurdish, Laki, Luri, and other local Iranian dialects. He is interested in how these dialects are related, how they differ from Persian, and what they might reveal about the older history of the people who speak them. One of the important reports in the book comes from Sanandaj in 1903. Man arrives in Sanandaj on March 19th after traveling through Tehran, Saveh, Sultanabad, Hamadan, and Sonkor. In the book, Sanandaj is described as the capital of Kurdistan. For Man, it becomes an important place for Kurdish language research. There he begins working immediately. He collects many Kurdish stories and poems, prepares a draft dictionary of the local dialect, and studies its grammar. He notices old passive verb forms and a rare verbal form connected with wishing or desire. But the Sanandaj report is not only about Sanandaj itself. In the same report, Man also looks back at the work he had done before arriving there. He explains his research in Luristan, Kermanshah, Khorramabad, Nahavand, Barujerd, Kansar, and Semnan. Through these places, he compares Kurdish, Laki, Luri, and other local Iranian dialects. So Sanandaj becomes a kind of center in the report, a place where Man gathers Kurdish material, but also a place from which he organizes and explains what he had learned during the previous months of travel. After Sanandaj, another major place in the book is Sauj Bulak, today's Mahabad. This section is one of the most important parts of the book for Kurdish oral literature. In Sauj Bulak, Man finds a Kurdish storyteller and poet named Rahman Baqir. Rahman Baqir knows old Kurdish epics and songs by heart. For Man, this is a major discovery. Man records thousands of lines from him. In one letter, he says he has written down around 8,000 lines of poetry, and now has to begin the difficult work of translating them word by word. This is one of the most powerful moments in the book. It shows that Kurdish literature was not only kept in written books, it lived in memory, it lived in voice, it lived in people like Rahman Baqir, who carried poems, songs, and stories inside themselves. For Kurdish literature, this part is extremely valuable. It gives us a picture of oral tradition before many of these materials were printed or studied by modern scholars. Man had hoped to continue from Persia into Ottoman Kurdish regions, including places such as Suleymaniye, Rawanduz, Ahmadiyya, Cizre, Karput, and Mush. But this plan faced serious problems. Ottoman permission did not arrive, and Man's health became worse. He suffered from typhoid fever and had to return to Berlin earlier than planned in 1903. But his work was not finished. His second expedition took place between 1906 and 1907. This journey was more directly focused on Kurdish regions under Ottoman rule, in areas that are now mostly in Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Man left Berlin, traveled through Hamburg, the Mediterranean, Alexandria, Beirut, and then reached Aleppo. Aleppo is important because it becomes the gateway to the second journey. It is not the deepest part of the Kurdish fieldwork, but it is where Man prepares for it. He organizes money, baggage, horses, letters of recommendation, and local contacts. He also looks for Kurdish speakers who might help him with language material. From Aleppo, Man moves toward Urfa. In Urfa, the second journey begins to feel more directly connected to Kurdish research. Man studies local speech, records vocabulary, observes society, and prepares to move further into Kurdish-speaking regions. The letters from Urfa mix scholarship with personal life. He writes about family matters, health, money, and travel plans, but also about the daily rhythm of research. From Urfa, the journey continues to Siverek. Siverek becomes more important for linguistic work. Man studies Kurdish forms, compares dialects, records vocabulary, and sends academic information back to scholars in Germany. The Siverek letters show both excitement and frustration. He finds useful material, but he also struggles with difficult conditions, unreliable helpers, and problems of communication. After Siverek, man moves through Diyarbakir and Ergani. This part of the journey becomes physically harder. The letters describe heat, fatigue, horses, roads, mountains, officials, and the difficulty of keeping the expedition moving. But for man, this is not only geography, it is also language. Every town and village may offer a new dialect sample. Every speaker may help him understand another part of Kurdish speech. The journey then continues toward Karput, Mazra, Mush, and Bitlis. These areas are important because they belong to a complex Ottoman world where Kurds, Armenians, Turks, and others live in close contact. In these sections, the letters show both the cultural complexity of the region and the emotional pressure of the journey. Man writes about tiredness, uncertainty, loneliness, illness, and the difficulty of receiving letters from home. But he keeps working, he continues recording words, comparing dialects, and searching for reliable speakers. The regions of Botan, Cizre, and Zakho are especially meaningful. Botan and Cizre are not ordinary place names in Kurdish cultural memory. They are connected with Kurdish history, classical literature, and the wider world of Kurdish identity. Cizre, also known as Cizre, is especially associated with old Kurdish cultural and literary traditions. When man moves through these regions, the journey becomes difficult again. He faces problems with animals, transport, officials, military pressure, and border politics. But these places give the book a deeper Kurdish geography. They connect the travel letters with regions that many Kurdish listeners will recognize as historically and culturally important. Later, man reaches Mosul. Mosul becomes a place of waiting, organizing, translating, and recovering. The letters from Mosul include personal frustration, scholarly work, visits, illness, delayed letters, bad weather, and future travel plans. Man also writes about the ruins of Nineveh and becomes angry when he sees ancient remains being damaged or used as building material. In Mosul, he also works on translating Kurdish poems he had collected earlier. His life there becomes repetitive, reading, writing, translating, visiting people, dealing with rain and muddy streets, and preparing for the next part of the journey. The book is important because it gives us a rare view of Kurdish-speaking regions before the First World War. It shows towns and villages, dialects and tribes, oral poets and storytellers, local rulers and officials, roads and borders, illness and travel, private emotions and academic ambition. It also shows how Kurdish language was studied by European scholars. Man's work helped document Kurdish dialects, oral literature, songs, stories, and epics at a time when many of these voices were not yet printed or widely known. But the book also has a difficult side. Man often writes with the attitude of a European scholar who believes he is above the people he studies. Some of his descriptions are unfair, offensive, and shaped by the colonial thinking of his time. The Arabic translator and the editor keep these elements because they show the mentality of that period. So, letters from Kurdistan should be listened to with two ears. With one ear, we hear the Kurdish voices man recorded, the dialects, poems, stories, and memories of people whose words might otherwise have disappeared. With the other ear, we hear the voice of European Orientalism, a voice that studies, collects, classifies, and sometimes judges the people it depends on. This is what makes the book both valuable and complicated. In the end, Letters from Kurdistan is more than a travel book. It is a record of language, memory, and fieldwork. It is a window into Kurdish regions at the beginning of the 20th century. It preserves parts of Kurdish oral literature and dialect history, while also revealing the colonial eyes through which many European scholars viewed the East. For anyone interested in Kurdish language, Kurdish literature, oral storytelling, travel history, or the history of orientalist scholarship, this book is an important source. It reminds us that languages are not just systems of grammar. They are carried by people, by villages, by poems, by songs, by letters, and by memories. And sometimes a book of old travel letters can still carry the voices of a world that might otherwise have been forgotten.